Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you're all having a good start to the long weekend here. For those that get to take that, I know I personally am kind of pumped. My daughter, she just started high school, and she's in the marching band at our school. And at our high school, the marching band is like revered. It's an incredible program, and so I get to watch her march tonight at the high school football game. I'm also kind of pumped because now that she's in high school, I have a reason to go to all the high school football games. So, going to be a great weekend ahead, and I hope that all of you do as well. I know there's a lot of folks around the country that are still dealing with quite a bit of adverse weather. I'm thinking a lot about where, of course, Hurricane Idalia went through, and some of the devastation that we've seen in parts of the southeast. We're going to cover that again in just a few seconds here, but it's the end of a month or the beginning of a new one, and so I want to do a quick review of what August gave you. So the map I've been talking over looks at the month of August, and we're looking at precipitation ranks. Now, one of the things I will remember this August most for, besides the two hurricanes like Idalia and then Hillary, was the just exceptional drought that continued to develop across parts of the South. Now, we did get storms in parts of Texas, in parts of Louisiana and Mississippi, but they did not undo the longer standing dry conditions that we saw there. The West continues to be extremely wet except for the Willamette Valley, the I-5 corridor. We saw in August continued dryness in parts of the Corn Belt in the upper Midwest. Parts of the Mid-Atlantic missed out on this as well. But when we think about August in review, it's going to be one of those months where you think about the front half much differently than you do the back half of the month for a lot of people across the country. And this is what I mean. If you look at the 30-day statistics, okay, so the last 30 days, we start to see a few areas that showed up extremely wet. So I'm thinking about early in the month, the incredibly wet weather here. Then when the big ridge opened up, the huge storms that came through parts of the eastern Great Lakes into parts of Ohio. You know, I think about how wet things were, of course, with Hillary coming through. But then, you know, you get on the other side of that, and overall, we've had a very weak monsoon. So it's been a very just interesting month to dissect front half versus back half. And the back half looks like this. So this is your last 14 days through yesterday. So we can now see the exceptionally heavy rain from Idalia here. We can see Harold, which went right through this part of Texas. And then, of course, the very, very wet conditions throughout the West simply because of Hillary. And if you're in the midsection of the country, remember a big section of August was dominated by that large ridge. And under that ridge, we just did not get the moisture in place or have the lift to make storms. So the last 2 weeks, major portions of the Midwest, the Western Plains, the Northern Plains, and then down here in the Mid-South to the Southern Plains have just been almost seen no precipitation at all. So just some contrast here. And also take a look at this part of the Mid-Atlantic, showing up very dry in this as well. Now in the last 3 days, this is total accumulated precipitation. The last 3 days, we can now see again that stripe of Idalia's 6 to 10 to 12 inch rainfall event that happened right in through here. We've had these bigger storms in parts of the Northeast. We're going to see better storms that are going to come out of Arizona for a few days here as this trough digs into the west and helps kind of reinvigorate the right kind of flow to get moisture into the southwest. But overall, we've seen a weaker than average monsoon. There's been big storms, but it's not been the widespread rainfall events that are needed to make that happen. Elsewhere, we did have two fronts that zipped through. It's kind of fun. You can see them. There was one here, and there's a second one here that moved through parts of the northern tier of the United States, and that's going to continue here in the near term before some major heat comes in behind these. Okay, other ways to look at this. This is our newest update on the soil moisture data. This is down to 40 inches or 100 centimeters, and this again is a percentile. So this means we're comparing this to historical past. This doesn't mean that there's only 2% moisture here. This is comparing it to historical past. But we see that throughout much of the Mississippi, Missouri, and parts of the Ohio basin, we are very, very dry compared to history. We can also find some other areas, again, parts of Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic, down here along the Gulf Coast, and that area we continue to talk about in the Pacific Northwest. So just keeping all of this in mind, this upcoming September and October forecasts are going to be critical for some of our major river systems. And we've watched this now for months, but this is the newest update on the Mississippi River at Memphis. And what I really appreciate about this is that they did add some color coding to it. So now we can start to see, down here, this would be lower than we were a year ago if we do get down here, and this would be the highest. So one thing to point out, September a year ago, we were sitting at about 3 feet below low level. And here we are again at 2.89 feet below low level as we start the month of September. So this is going to be just a major concern, the health of that river. We know there's not a lot of water that is draining into it right now from its basin. because of how dry it's been. And until we start to see better signals for more moisture, that's going to give us a concern that we could go back into what we saw last year, which was for the river to lose another 10 feet of depth. And if it does that, the consequences on barge traffic. So that, remember, a lot of that was lost in late September into October. And we've built a case, although it's speculative, but we've built a case this year that we're not going to see that same thing setting up. All right. Now, there's always two sides to every coin, right? So we know that we see better possibilities, but the other side of the coin would be if persistence in the next 10 days wins out, then we do have a bit of a troubling outlook for the Mississippi Basin. I want to take you west, though, really quickly and show you California's reservoirs. This is a forecast that, if I look back to what I was saying back last winter, this is one that I took a big misstep on. I said, yeah, the reservoirs are going to be full, but generally speaking, we tend to drain quite a bit of water out of them throughout the season. I think I just underestimated how much snow is in the mountains. And when you see that most of the big reservoirs in California are currently above their historic averages or very close to it, we know that we're going to go into a season with reservoirs that are quite healthy. The Pacific Northwest has a little bit different view of this. And just to show you the latest drought monitor update, we continue to watch the Pacific Northwest struggle with drought. But overall, the drought monitor, we did see some areas here in the Midwest continue to see degradation. We watched a large section here of Texas getting over to Louisiana show degradation. Here's that weaker southwestern monsoon we've been dealing with, and there are a few patches east that continue to be watched. So as it stands, we still have a substantial portion of this country in drought as we start to head into fall. And it's going to be something that'll be top of mind to see if things change. Now, when I think about winter in this upcoming winter forecast, I honestly only expect one area to see the drought possibly be maintained or get worse. And I think it's going to be the Pacific Northwest. I expect improvement all across the southern tier of the U.S., and I expect this area to be shrunk as well through winter in terms of the drought. Now, but remember, as soon as that soil freezes in this area, then we cannot replenish any moisture deficits until spring. Now, spring can do it. It can do it quickly. But that was the problem we ran into this year. Last fall's drought meant that this area never recovered in soil moisture throughout winter because the soil froze. And then the spring rains were great until they stopped, which was around May 8th or 9th or 10th. So just a quick recap there for you. Let's flip it over to a discussion on temperatures. And this is not going to be the way that many in the central United States remember August. Now, if you are in Texas all the way to Florida, August was just hot the entire month, save 1 or 2 days when that front finally came through. But for the majority of this population down here, it is going to go down in the history books as the warmest or second warmest on record. All right, so this was hot. Same thing for the Northwest. But in the midsection of the country, it was a cool start, really, really hot toward mid to late month, and then a cool finish to the month. I mean, we had a cold front came through here. Last Sunday, a frost in the UP. We had, we got down into the 50s for overnight lows, 40s up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and parts of Michigan. So it's been a bit more of, I guess, we often call a roller coaster for the Midwest in New England versus what we've seen down south. Thinking about that, I want to show you one other kind of cumulative statistic here. This is downward solar flux. So what we're looking at here is how much of the sun's light gets down to the surface. And underneath where all that heat was, we've had a surplus of sunshine. And so you can see we're much above average through a big section of our cotton belt here, getting into the front range of the Rockies. And then you can see out west, all the way through, this whole area and through here has had more cloud cover than anything. Some of this is wildfire smoke induced as well, but this is where we've seen a deficit in sunlight. So just another statistic there to kind of take a look at. This is where we stand today. The sun is trying to rise. This is what's left of Idalia here. It's moving across the east. The sun is here. But what I'm watching is what's going on in the western United States. So last night, here's the main front dipping through to the south of that low, but the next deeper trough comes into the west. There was isolated storms in the southeast. Let's go back and get that again. There we go. And here along the Gulf Coast. But watch what happens as I get into the overnight. Look at the size of some of these storms here coming out of from Southern California into the Four Corner states. This is where the deeper trough is really starting to show up. And we watched overnight. Look at this plume of, this is moisture in the form of clouds that you're being able to see here. And that's going to be a mainstay of the pattern here through the weekend, is a deeper trough of low pressure over the western United States. Okay, next thing to cover though is that the tropics we've been discussing are going to go into a bit of a, I would just call it a little bit more of a calmer regime. Doesn't mean there won't be any, but I want to make a case for that one more time. We're looking here at what's left of Idalia, Franklin out, Jose moving north. We have two areas, what we call Invest 94L. It's got a 90% chance of developing. And we have this other area we're watching to the south. It's got a 40% chance of developing. And if we just look out there over the next 10 days, 94L moves north and northwest, I guess. We'll keep an eye on the one that's to the south just to see if it can make it farther over toward the Lesser Antilles over the next 10 days. And I'm going to continue to watch. I still think there's a chance that some of the convection here makes it into the Bay of Campeche. But outside of that, we do see a bit of suppression on the hurricane season temporarily. And what I mean by that is we're going into the first 11 days of September, which climatologically move us at the peak. And we just need to be aware that even though there are ingredients that are going to be missing, doesn't mean we can't get a hurricane out of this. I'm just saying that if those ingredients were in place, then I'd have a much different discussion for you right now on the activity of this hurricane season, this part of the hurricane season. What you're looking at again here is just the probability of getting a tropical depression in the next 10 days. Okay. Now, where we stand on this hurricane season, this is accumulated cyclone energy from the 11 named systems we've had. The majority that has contributed to us being above the climatological average, which you can now see, has been from Franklin. So Franklin's added 26.1 units of accumulated cyclone energy. But I just want to make a point, we're here. We still have all of this to go climatologically. So still a lot more could be going on toward the second half of this season. So now we kind of got a bit of a basis on that. I want to show you some of the factors controlling this. Current sea surface temperatures. Now we're going to come back to this map a couple of times here in the next minute or so because I want to talk about the influence of our El Nino, which is kind of more east-based than central-based, and we need to see what that's going to mean. We've watched the squashing of our negative Pacific Meridional, and there's a lot of warm water in the North Pacific and North Atlantic. Now in the North Atlantic, this right here is just the cool water trail from Franklin, but there is still very warm water throughout most of the main development region into this part of the Atlantic Ocean. So I want to show you what we're getting out of this. And we're going to go straight to the newest update. Sorry if I can get back on that. There we go. From our Climate Prediction Center. So they updated this yesterday. And this is their new outlook for the month of September in terms of drought. Now, I showed you all that ocean temperature stuff because we questioned whether or not we are really going to get deeper and deeper in drought in this area for the month. Because of the pattern that's setting up over the next 7 to 10 days. My question is it going to last? So I'm going to jump right into the long range. We'll come back to the short range in a second. Because in addition to this, they updated their newest 1 month outlook. Now we anticipated this, right? I told you, expect to see the CPC expand that warmth. Remember, I've drawn that line numerous times and said they're probably going to expand the dryness in this region as well. But we knew that the front part of the month was going to give us this. We got heat coming into this area in multiple waves, and it's drier in this area for the next 10 days, save one chance of storms kind of trying to come through here. But we questioned whether or not that was going to last to the end of the month. And we have to remember that any tropical system in the Gulf could completely disrupt any forecast for the southeast or even the east coast. All right, so that's always going to be a wild card. But let me make a case for you as to what I think is happening here in the month of September. The MJO jumped out into phase 4 and 5. And that's a move that's kind of interesting. It's telling me that the MJO is kind of open to moving. And what I mean by that is if you look at what we call these Hofmüller diagrams, wherever you see this shade of color, that's rising motion. And you see the numbers down here, 1 through 8. This is now, and this goes through the first 15 days of September. So what we're seeing here is a transition from phases 1, 2, and 3. So just kind of follow. It goes like this, and I could draw this here at the same time. We start to slide farther and farther east with the MJO. Now, why I think this puts just a temporary, albeit weak, lid on the tropical season is because these shades represent sinking motion, suppression. And that's kind of sitting over parts of the Atlantic and South America. So we just see that and say, all right, that could give us 10 days where the atmosphere is not just capable of every day kicking off a new tropical system. That's really the way you interpret that. But this movement of the MJO into this direction, I think is going to influence overall our patterns. All right, let's go back to that. So that's what we see when we're right here now on the diagram and we're moving over here to phases 4 and 5. And then it's expected to come back around to phases 7 and 8, which is back into the Pacific Ocean. So what does all that mean? Well, that MJO movement is largely symptomatic of what El Niño's doing. El Niño's the underlying thing. The MJO is the surface thing, the thing moving over the top of it. We also have, as I pointed out a moment ago, very warm water here. And this is a part of something called the Atlantic Meridional Mode, so the AMM. Now, what I want to do for you is kind of just stitch it together and try to make a case. So for the month of September, if the Atlantic Meridional Mode, which is right now very positive, if it stays that way, you end up getting a relationship with precipitation where these cooler colors represent drier conditions. So you see now that area that they've had forecast dry lines up, or drier, excuse me, the CPC lines up with where the Atlantic Meridional Mode is a bit drier. But we have some competing factors. For example, if you come out to the middle of the Pacific, we've got the Nino region 3.4 that is going, it's getting warmer. Now, we would look for a positive correlation with this. So that would be wetter in this area and wetter in this area. But look where the relationship is drier. It's right in the middle. So you see how that also lines up? Let's just go back and look at it. Sorry. You see how that also lines up with that forecast? So those are two of the big reasons why the CPC is saying, we think it's going to be drier in this area. And I would agree with them on that point. But we have a more what we call east-based El Nino event. And when you just look at the warm ocean temperatures next to South America, there's still a bit of a drier bias here, but we don't see it so strongly on either side. And look what it does possibly into California. That's something we're going to talk about again in a few seconds here. So we can keep kind of stitching all of these different things together. That's the beauty of this site. You can look at any of these factors and try to push them up against what we see the forecast being. But that, I think, is why the CPC did what it did. Now, what I want to do is this. Let's actually try to capture more of maybe the evolution of the pattern. So let's go to September, but let's toss in October, November. Because when you do that, you see that when you leave September, you tend to go right into a much wetter pattern in through here, here, and here, late in September and into October, November. Now, this gives me hope for not having major drought on our big river systems. We then say, well, what about out in the middle of the equatorial Pacific? Let's do Nino 3.4. You see a very similar thing, but a much stronger dry bias for the Pacific Northwest. See what we're doing here? We're stitching to these things together for late summer and early fall. And what about that Atlantic Meridional Mode? Well, the Atlantic Meridional Mode, let's click on it here, does continue to stress drier conditions in this area, but you could make a case that the Atlantic Meridional Mode is beginning a slow fade. It was very strong in summer, but it's beginning its slow fade. So I'm looking here for any signal that could say, hey, bring in some moisture back into the mid part of the country. And I think we're beginning to see that this forecast, that this forecast here of drier conditions is likely true through the front half of September, but I imagine it breaks down toward the end. And my reason for telling you that is because the control that I think El Nino is going to start to have on other factors like the MJO, like the subtropical jet stream, I think those things are going to start to take over. So let me explain to you what I mean. Here we go. This is a top-down view on the northern hemisphere, right on the North Pole, of our jet stream level winds. And when I play through the weekend, you see the main factors. We've talked about it all week. The northern branch of the jet screams over the top. There is our trough over the west. This is the ridge that opens up, bringing in the heat. That's the same narrative all week. We then said that's going to last in through Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. It's still there. See this? So the northern branch skips over the top. There's the trough in the southwest. Here's the ridge that opens up, and there's going to be some heat in here. Now we start to see better chances of storms in the Midwest when we get out midweek next week. But what I'm watching is, once we get past those first 7 or 8 days of September, the models are getting us back by day 10 into this look. Now this is what I'll watch carefully. That right there is the subtropical jet. And we see that it is apparently in the forecast trying to get rid of these big ridging events that keep pushing here. And that's going to send the heat back south where it's been all summer, unfortunately. But this is going to really line things out and that's going to increase chances. I mean, anytime you have jet stream flow, you have better chances of clouds and precip. But do you notice how this looks? It kind of comes around like this, and there's another piece that comes around like that. And overall, we see the fastest winds in the Middle East and coming off of Japan, and then kind of exiting here. Now, I want to show you something neat. If you look at September's historically, let's shrink that up. Whenever we had developing El Niños, what did you get? Fast over parts of the Middle East, fast leaving Japan, and fast here, just where we identified it. And the beginning development of a subtropical jet. And if that subtropical jet gets going, this is why I think the front half of September does not look like the back half of September. I think we tend to go later in the month to much more active weather pattern. And we have the wild card of tropical systems. So that's what I think I'm seeing. So I say all of this because I'm most worried about this plot. I mean, I live in this area too, so this is why I think about it. But I need that river to be navigable. And I want to know if there is a high chance of it being very dry all the way through October, or if we see something different. And the big difference is a year ago, we still had La Nina. The big difference a year ago was we had no subtropical jet stream flowing. And now that we see it, we just have to say maybe there's a better chance of getting it there. The other thing about those years is that we tended to have a lot of MJO phase 7-8, a lot of MJO out here in the Pacific Ocean. All of these years in September, that's where the MJO composite lived, okay? And so what I think about here is in September, if we end up getting that, look at where the ridge tends to be. It tends to be if it's an MJO phase 7 here. See this trough? That means subtropical jet has to go around that. And therefore, this could start to push that flow into the United States, getting us better chances in this area. If it gets into phase 8, then we're really in business. Subtropical jet comes around, polar jet goes over. This is where the problems become really apparent in the Pacific Northwest. But see that trough in through there? There's no way you can maintain full warm September if that develops late in the month. And if that also develops, it brings in just inclement weather. So I think September's a tale of two halves, and I think October comes in looking like this. So that's my long-range update for you right now. All right, how about some near-term stuff? Next 7 days. We do expect with the deeper trough coming into the west, a lot of stormy activity here. We're going to watch the Gulf. There's some good northward flow, bringing some moisture, and there's going to be increased chances of storms in this area. There's a system that's going to drag a front through here, but outside of that, if you see white, you're looking at drier conditions here overall. This morning's high-res models, just watch the west. You're going to see scatter storms in the southeast, but watch the west here. Throughout the day today, that deeper trough settles in, and while there's isolated storms here, we just see continual pull on Pacific moisture. Look at that. It's all throughout the day today into tomorrow morning. A lot of isolated storm events here, and that's just the effect of that deeper trough rolling into this section of the country. As we get out there to Sunday, let's see where this all goes by flipping over to the European model. Now remember, the European model is not convection allowing, so you're not going to see such vivid depiction of the precipitation on the mountains. We're looking for the bigger pattern here. So we've seen through Saturday, all these flashes of green, that's how the European model shows you big storms here. But take note of what's coming out of the lower Mississippi Valley here. High pressure slides east, pull on the moisture. It's called return flow. And we see that by next Tuesday, as this low tries to eject, we talked about it all week, eject out of Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, and then run up in this direction. It's going to leave a front. And that front will be sitting right in through here by the time we get in next Wednesday. This is next Wednesday morning, afternoon, and evening. We're going to watch for storms on that front. And ahead of it, earlier in the week, storms that are going to hit this particular section of the country. So that front slides through by Thursday, and we just continue to see chances of isolated storms. And I pick out this area because I just know we've been watching, that area, and the drought that's been in it for so long. So let's keep an eye on that as we go through our next 7 days. So what about 10-day outlooks? Our chances for getting an inch of rain have now begun to improve here. It's still way down here, but it's improved. Wettest along the Gulf Coast, wettest in the west, and we're going to follow that system. See it? So on the drier side of this is the chances of getting less than half of an inch. We keep the ridge anchored in this area. That's why it's drier. But this area has seen the probabilities lower for less than half of an inch. That's the main story I wanted to get out. Look at week 2. Now you see the CPC, the European, and the GFS all seeing a more normal to above normal precipitation into this area. Why? Ridge is diving back toward the south and west. It's in all 3 models. We're getting some consistent picture out there. That's that after the first 10 plus days of the month. That's the shift we're seeing. So we're already looking at forecast maps that are beyond the middle of the month. Okay, temperature side of this. Today's high temperatures, look at the heat in the Midwest, builds in on Saturday and Sunday. We're talking temperatures here in parts of Minnesota that are almost 30 degrees warmer than normal. Hundreds that stretch through the plains. This is Sunday, getting into Monday. Very hot in the central United States, cool in the west as the deeper trough is there. Now remember, by Monday, that's when the low's ejecting out of this area, heading through here. So as it goes into Tuesday, see the front coming in the back side of it? That gives you a break in the heat. And then we expect the heat to rebound again as it pushes east and then pulls back in next Thursday into this section of the country. The Climate Prediction Center still is watching the 8th through the 14th for excessive heat in the central United States. And that's pretty well seen by our ensembles. Played this out day 5 through 10. Watch the heat building into this area. But at the very end of the run, that's when mid-month it begins to break down. So what I'm saying here is we see heat anchored in this area, but not so much running along its edge into the northeast. So that's that kind of picture we're trying to paint here. All right, I got one last thing I want to tell you about before this longer weekend, and it goes to South America because this winter for South America has been warm. This is a 90-day look back at temperatures compared to average, and it's hard-pressed to find cooler conditions. I did get multiple people emailing me and texting and calling about the fact that they are allowed to start planting in South America today. So that is right. They did get a 15-day early extension. And some recent rains in Brazil have brought the root zone soil moisture up. The thing I'm concerned about is this is still remnant of last growing season's major drought in Argentina. So root zone soil moisture there from NASA's GRACE mission is still very, very low in that area. And thinking about that, what did the last 3 months do? So May to mid to late August, we had areas like around Cordoba and Santa Fe that were dry, northern Argentina dry. It was only over here in Buenos Aires province where we saw above normal winter precipitation. So we're still undoing some longer term drought in this area. Now, if this will play, hope this will play for you here. This is, look back at the last week. And I want you to watch right here. These are very early rains for this large area of Brazil's growing area. Watch right in through here. That's normally what we typically see at the beginning of October. But that rain came through, helped along by transition in the MJO, a frontal boundary that stretched to the south. And as we look out there over the next 2 weeks, we do not expect above normal rains to continue in this area. What that means is the green light has been given to plant. But from my talks I've had over the years with groups of Brazilian farmers, generally what they're waiting on is 50 millimeters of rain, or about 2 inches. They've got to get the soil moisture up so that everything they plant, which is mostly going to be a soybean crop going in early here, that's going to be able to germinate. So they will be patient because they know how important this next crop is given soybean prices. Now take a look. Paraguay, Rio Grande do Sul, Uruguay, Argentina, very wet on a stalled out boundary. Extremely wet. Some places here more than 100 millimeters in excess of rainfall. So that's huge. So we need to watch it carefully to see if we can recover from drought conditions south. But we'll see, I think, the monsoon going in fits and starts to the north. That's what I got for you. So I hope that was enough to kind of get you through a good long 3-day weekend. I'll pick up again on Tuesday, and we'll kind of see how this all shakes down. Have a good rest of your weekend. I know I will, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.